cyberspace strategies and capabilities of major world powers, compare these with the status in India, and draw useful lessons. The series lays special focus on offensive cyber and cyber influence operations. In our first episode held on 3rd July 22, we had three eminent speakers, one of whom was Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, the National Cyber Security Coordinator in the Prime Minister's office. In that episode, we reviewed the cyberspace capabilities of major players, their strategies and structures, and compared them with that of India. We had also looked into the merits and demerits of adopting an offensive defensive stance in cyberspace and the need for developing offensive cyber capabilities accordingly. In this episode today, we shall look into the governance architecture to defend India's national cyberspace and shall brainstorm on how to strike a right balance among the charters of major actors involved in the defense of national cyberspace, namely MOD, the armed forces, MEA, external agencies, MHA, and the private sector. We shall also brainstorm the view that the MOD or the armed forces must play a pivotal role in the defense of national cyberspace, with perhaps an exclusive charter for offensive cyber operations in sync with their role in the traditional domains of land, sea, and air. To discuss this, we have a very eminent panel who will be sharing their views. Our first speaker of the day is Lieutenant General P.R. Kumar, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, retired. General Kumar, in his illustrious career spanning 39 years, has held many prestigious command staff and instructional appointments in varied operational environments. He was the Director General of Army Aviation prior to taking over as the Director General of Military Operations. As a DGMO, he was responsible for all operational matters of the Indian Army, including national disaster management, interface with all ministries, the PMO and the NSA, for validating the doctrinal and modernization process of the Indian Army. He was also co-chair of the Army Expert Committee group with the US Army. After retirement, the General keeps current on all contemporary strategic and security-related issues worldwide and delivers talks in education institutions within the armed forces and outside, like IIMs and IITs. He regularly writes on geostrategic and security-related issues for think tanks. General Kumar will be speaking to us on the recommended charter for MOD, on the armed forces, and of course on multi-domain operations for national governance architecture. Welcome, General Kumar, and we look forward to hearing your views. Our next speaker is Mr. Jiten Jain, who is a leading cybersecurity expert, having specialization in geopolitical intelligence analysis and mapping them to global cyber conflicts. He is currently heading India InfoSec Consortium, an independent not-for-profit organization. He is also the co-founder of Voyager InfoSec, a technology startup specializing in cyber threat intelligence. Jiten is a recipient of the Chevening Fellowship by the British government and has studied cyber defense and information assurance at the Defense Academy of the United Kingdom. Acknowledging his authority on cybersecurity, Amity University has conferred him an honorary professorship. He is also visiting faculty at the National Police Academy and the Foreign Service Institute of the Ministry of External Affairs. He's previously served as a cybersecurity advisor in the Ministry of Electronics and IT. Mr. Jain will be speaking to us on cyber espionage, existing recommended charter for MEA, NTRO, and recommendations for national governance architecture. Welcome, Mr. Jiten Jain, and we look forward to hearing your views. Our third panelist is Mr. Brijesh Singh, IPS, who is Additional DG Police of Maharashtra. Earlier, he has held the responsibility of Maharashtra Cyber, a unit looking after cyber security of the government of Maharashtra for several years. He has successfully led Maharashtra Cyber Security Project in combating cyber crimes in Maharashtra through predictive policing, cutting-edge cyber forensics tools. MHCert and the Certificate Center of Excellence is what he's established. As Secretary and DG Information and Public Relations Directorate, he's led the modernization projects like Media and Social Media Analysis Center and the state-of-art recording studio. As IGCID, he implemented the prestigious crime and criminal tracking system for the Maharashtra Police, connecting all of its 1,100 police stations to a state-of-art technology platform when with his team digitized the legacy data of 1.42 crore documents. He has also led capacity building initiatives by training over 1 lakh police personnel, which earned his team the Government E-Excellence Award by the DIT Government of Maharashtra. Under his leadership, 48 state-of-the-art cyber district labs have been set up, and his efforts have made Maharashtra the first state in the country to sanction 43 cyber police stations. He has led the cyber capacity building and public awareness projects involving more than 1 lakh people. He has implemented the first automated multimodal biometric identification system initiative in India, where iris face recognition, palm prints would be used for identification of crimes in the Maharashtra state. The Maharashtra Cyber Digital Crime Unit, a government industry anti-piracy collaboration led by him, has successfully taken down more than 400 pirate websites and issued critical advisories. Both these organizations have been awarded with several national and international honors. He is also a renowned author and a tech thought leader. He writes in newspapers and appears on media on cybersecurity related issues. He has penned a thriller also, Quantum Siege, which has been published by Penguin Books. His recent books, Dangerous Minds of India, has been well received. We welcome Mr. Brajesh Singh and look forward to his views on protection of critical information infrastructure, defense against organized cybercrime, existing and recommended charter for MHA, and recommendations for national governance architecture. Our moderator for this webinar also is Lieutenant General Dr. R.S. Panwar, AVSM, SMVSM, who retired after 40 years of active military service in the Corps of Signals. His last appointment was Commandant Military College of Telecommunication Engineering, MAU, which carries out training of officers and soldiers in the field of ICT, electronic warfare, and cyber operations, and is also a designated center of excellence for the Indian Army for these disciplines. The General holds MTech and PhD degrees in computer science and engineering from IIT Bombay, as well as a Master Management Studies degree from Osmania University, Hyderabad. He has attended the National Security and Strategic Studies course at the National Defense College, Delhi, and is also a special one-term semester cryptology course at IIT Delhi. He is credited in implementing several enhancements to the Indian Army networks and ushering a network-centric era in the highly active operational environment of J&K, and also for evolving organizational restructuring models as a part of Army transformation studies. The General is a recipient of several awards for the President for Distinguished Service for the Defense Forces, and has been awarded by the Department of Defense Production for R&D work. Last year was conferred the coveted Distinguished Alumnus Award by IIT Bombay, the only defense officer to hold such an honor for the services rendered in uniform. We welcome General Panwar and the panelists, and without further ado, it is over to you, General Panwar, for the conduct of this webinar.
Thank you so much, General Murthy, and as always, it's a pleasure to be on the CASA webinar series and to be moderating such a panel with such eminent speakers on it. Now, taking off from where General Murthy has introduced the webinar series, I would only like to add that as far as objectives go, while the full spectrum of cyber operations is very wide, the series is structured to focus primarily on offensive cyber operations, as well as cyber influence operations. And here I am using the term offensive cyber operations to imply those actions which are employed to disrupt or destroy strategic targets. And cyber espionage is not included within their ambit. Now, the objective of today's episode is to discuss and brainstorm on what should be the contours of a cyberspace governance architecture, which is best suited to defend India's national cyberspace. Now, it is important to highlight at the outset that we are looking at cyberspace operations from a national security perspective and not through the prism of cybercrime. Also, the term defend should not be taken to mean employment of a purely defensive strategy. It goes without saying that offensive capability is an essential element of any conflict winning strategy in the physical domains, and cyberspace is no different. Indeed, one of the primary motivations behind this series is to draw attention to the importance of developing offensive cyber capabilities in cyberspace. In this context, I find it somewhat perplexing to observe that, unlike in the physical warfighting domains where nations unabashedly flaunt their offensive capabilities with great pride, in cyberspace there is a notable hesitation in adopting a similar stance, despite most nations, including India, having declared cyberspace as the newest domain of warfare. Now, in trying to analyze the reason for this hesitancy, I find the following rationale most plausible. Unlike kinetic operations, which can be easily attributed to the perpetrating state, cyber operations are generally clandestine by nature, and attribution is very difficult, though not impossible. This is also the reason why cyber operations are arguably the most important component of gray zone warfare. At the same time, it is important to realize that cyber operations are increasingly becoming an important component of all-out conflicts as well. And if one closely analyzes cyber operations being executed by both sides in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, while full clarity will emerge only once the fog of war clears up, it is pretty evident that they are playing a significant role. And the conflict is quite justifiably being dubbed as the first global cyber war. Therefore, if under the UN Charter, use of armed forces justified under a given set of conditions, there is no reason for armed forces to shy away from open employment of cyber weapons in conjunction with kinetic force. Developing offensive cyber capabilities has therefore become a national imperative. And it is noteworthy here that as per the much quoted National Cyber Power Index 2020 by Harvard Belfer Center, the first 4 positions are occupied by the US, China, UK, and Russia, with India at the 21st position. Also, China has a score of 42, with India at 9. There is a need, therefore, to identify and flag all measures which India must take to enhance its cyber power. The focus of this episode is to deliberate on the right organizational model which must be put in place to make this happen. Now, the previous episode briefly touched upon cyberspace strategies and structures which are currently emerging at the global level, including those in India. In order to set the stage for today's discussions, I would like to reiterate some of the aspects. Firstly, global cyber strategies and structures. The US Cyber Command was raised in 2010, and all 4 services have significant cyber components. China raised its PLA Strategic Support Force in 2015, and its Ministry of State Security and certain other organizations are deeply involved in the conduct of information operations. Russia's demonstrated capabilities for conducting information warfare are arguably the best in the world, with the GRU playing a central role as far as disruptive cyber operations are concerned. The UK set up its National Cybersecurity Center under the GCHQ, an INT organization, in 2016, and established the National Cyber Force in 2020. Australia raised its Defence SIGINT and Cyber Command under the Australian Signals Directorate in 2018. Importantly, the declared strategies, public capabilities of all 5 states openly profess the employment of offensive cyber capabilities for thwarting external threats. As regards India, the promulgation of its national cyber strategy is imminent but long overdue. In terms of organizations, India established the CERT in 2004, the NCIIPC in 2014, the National Cyber Coordination Center in 2018, and the Defense Cyber Agency in 2019. And now it has also established sectoral CERTs and state-wise cyber establishments. From information available in the open domain, it is quite evident that the primary charter for offensive cyber operations in the US rests with the Cyber Command, in China with the PLA Strategic Support Force, and in Russia with the GRU, all of these being military organizations. On the other hand, in the UK and Australia, offensive cyber operations still seem to be jointly executed by external intelligence agencies and the armed forces. Although here too one can discern that the armed forces are playing an ever-increasing role in these operations. Coming to the Indian context, The primary contenders for being allocated the mandate for offensive cyber operations are the armed forces and the NTRO, with the DRDO in support. There is a role for non-state actors as well. Now, without delving into the details of the present setup, there is a need to deliberate upon what is the most optimum national security architecture to handle the mandate of offensive cyber operations. The focus on offensive cyber operations is not intended to downplay the importance of network security and resilience in the defense of national cyberspace. Indeed, from a national security perspective, protection of a critical infrastructure is of utmost importance. Since physical protection of critical infrastructure falls squarely within the ambit of the Ministry of Home Affairs, being an internal security matter, it follows therefrom that the responsibility as well as the accountability for protection of this infrastructure against cyber threats should also rest with the MHA. Furthermore, since critical infrastructure is to a large extent being operated by the private sector, they too have an important role to play in defending it against cyber threats. With that as a backdrop, this episode seeks answers to the following key questions. Firstly, should India declare its intent to employ offensive cyber capabilities as part of its national cyber strategy? Secondly, what is the recommended distribution of charters for offensive cyber operations amongst various agencies, both during gray zone operations as well as all-out conflicts? And thirdly, what should be the role of the MHA and the private sector in the defense of our critical information infrastructure? With that, I shall request the panelists to provide their views and insights which might contribute towards answering these questions. I would also welcome any other views on how to improve India's posture in cyberspace and help it become a cyber power to reckon with. I now hand over the floor to General P.R. Kumar. General P.R., we would like to hear a perspective on all these questions, especially from armed forces perspective, as you've been in the key appointments related to this. Over to you.
Thank you, General Panwar. Let me start by firstly thanking General Murthy, the founder CASA, the other members of the core committee, other CASA members, for allowing me this honor and privilege to interact on this increasingly pivotal domain of which is basically a virtual, non-kinetic domain, which could make a vast difference. Anybody who doesn't follow, monitor, train, and also are proactive in this domain will do so at his own peril. In fact, it will not be a dramatic statement to state that anybody who doesn't keep up in the domain of information space and cyberspace is going to face a lot of trouble, and it could even be existential. I have a fair amount of ground to cover. I'm afraid there will be a little bit of repetition because from the earlier episode, the basic structures of the other powers was not covered, but I will rush over them and then focus after some observations on the structure which I propose. I shall basically focus on the second part, that is the governance architecture. But before that, I think this particular audience is also more focused on security in terms of all multi-domain operations. So a few observations which I feel is very pertinent overall as far as multi-domain operations is concerned, and then also as far as cyber space management is concerned. As General Panwar has already brought out, space has already been declared a global commons. Cyberspace, in contrast, while it is a virtual domain, it will be interesting for all of you to know that the Supreme Court has ruled that the freedom of usage of the internet is protected under the Constitution. So there is a fair amount of debate on whether this should be an open domain like outer space, which again is debatable because outer space is no longer a global commons with the larger powers virtually securing the rights for its pivotal use. I also want to highlight one very important part, not strictly to do with this discussion, but to say that now, even at the tactical level, on the line of control at the company, right to the national level, at the military operations and the chief of staff committee level, the multi-domain operations with the non-kinetic, whether be it cyber, whether it is sales, whether it is the electromagnetic spectrum, today a fighter right in the front, a young officer, will have to carry out multi-domain operations. And so I strongly feel, and which I've been propagating to every place where I've been talking to, is that no longer should we call ourselves armed forces officer, but we must train, prepare, and also think of ourselves as national security professionals and shape ourselves in such a manner that whether be it at the district, state, or any other level, they should instinctively look towards the armed forces officers to give them national security professional advice. For the simple reason that those days of looking at SATSAP comics are long gone. Today, right from a young officer till the time he retires, an armed forces officer focuses on all aspects of geopolitical relations and national security. Second important point I want to make, when we look at any structure, which is slowly becoming initially very technical, I have seen that there is a complex, some sort of contest between the person who is the commander and the user and the person who is the technical expert. To just illustrate the point, I remember many years ago, we would like a particular QR for a particular appointment, but those days the coding and everything was not so fine-tuned. So the technical man will say, I can only give you this, whether you like it or not. So I feel that when we look at any structure, while the technical man will give you all the parameters of what all he can do and what he cannot do, the final word as far as the structure, the policy, and how we operate the entire managed cyberspace and information space is an operational aspect, right from the Prime Minister down to the lowest commander. The third aspect I must bring out is, as General Panwar to some has already alluded to, that just as the other physical spaces, the cyberspace is also virtually sovereign. While we can say that actually you cannot really control it, people from anywhere can attack anywhere, but at the same time, in the mind and as far as we attribute and also prepare for it, we must look at it as a fifth dimension of war, and we must protect it proactively and defensively, just as we do our physical territorial assets. And while it may be very difficult for attribution, but we must look at deterrence value, where the opponent or the adversary is very clear that there will be hell to pay in case he is identified. And so, as General Panwar himself has written, that it is now time to actually complement both cyberspace and infospace as a war fighting domain and encompass all three aspects of cyber warfare, electronic warfare, and psychological warfare. This has got a relevance when I come to the structure towards the end. Very quickly, the three main information infrastructures are the critical one, the non-critical one, and the exclusive information. And of course, because of the emergence of multi-domain security environment, there is a total overlap and there is not a strict circles which encompass these three infrastructures. For the simple reason that this multi-domain environment in kinetic and non-kinetic aspects actually interplay with each other. Like for example, in the kinetic domain, there are weapon systems on land which can attack aircraft as also ships in the ocean and vice versa. Similarly, cyber capability can cause physical destruction. Surprisingly, not only physical destruction as has been done by Israel for the nuclear infrastructure in Iran, but by causing physical damage by spreading dissent by using social media, both information as well through the cyber media. Very quickly, as General Panwar has already brought out, there is a balance between the US Cyber Command and the national agency. The command of the US Cyber Command is tackled with external, and interestingly, the 13 cyber mission teams of the US Cyber Command are meant for protection of critical infrastructure. And that means it is the armed forces which is looking at these critical infrastructure in the United States. As far as the United Kingdom is concerned, General Panwar has already highlighted that there is a new national cyber force which has come as recently as November last year, which in coincidence with the armed forces and the GCHQ, which is the UK's intelligence, security and cyber agency, their primary offensive is cyber warfare. It has been highlighted by General Panwar that most of these nations offensive cyber warfare for two reasons. One, it is considered as the fifth dimension of war. And second, it comes into the realm of confrontation and conflict. And so they have generally been tackled by the defense or armed forces. But I have my reservations as far as India is concerned on two counts. Firstly, whether we are the government or the powers or the political powers that be will allow us control of offensive cyber operations, for the simple reason it is not restricted to purely security aspects of the armed forces. It encompasses economic, diplomatic, political, resources. So as far as cyber agencies are concerned, the offensive cyber capability can impact all domains apart from the domains of warfare or the domains of the politics and the other aspects also. China, I will not go any further. It has got vast capabilities, and as General Panwar has brought out, it is one of the best in the world. While everything is not known, we know that the GRU of Russia is known for its aggression and recklessness and high tolerance for operational risk. Recently, the organization called SVR, which is the Russia Civilian Foreign Intelligence Service, is increasingly getting involved in long-term cyber operations. A word about the umbilical cord between space and cyber. You must know that while there are many ways of downing a satellite or all these or all space objects or moving objects which are controlled and are manned, the most important is the cyber, because the entire architecture of ground, space, and the link in between can be neutralized by cyber operations. In fact, the United Nations has already declared that a cyber attack on its sensitive facilities, especially in space, because it is the space cyber communication and the other aspects which virtually control its nuclear architecture, and it will be declared and it will be construed as an act of war. Very quickly, the various ministries which are currently stakeholders in the government, the Ministry of Defense, basically in terms of the fifth domain, Ministry of Home Affairs, Internal Security, Ministry of Electronics, basically looking at infrastructure, IT infrastructure, and the other int agencies who are involved in cyber, especially R&AW, which is involved in strategic cyber operations. The two main agencies which are currently looking after cyber management in India are the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center, which is the NCIIPC, along with, in conjunction with the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, which functions under the Ministry of Electronics and Communications. The National Cyber Coordination Center, the general who had spoken to us in the first seminar, has already brought out what all it does. We also have, in a very nascent stage, the Defense Cyber Agency, which, as the name implies, its charter is no longer so very clear, but it is restricted to cyber operations support to the armed forces, and it is a decentralized structure which can come down to teams, which goes down to the commands and the corps, and maybe down to further down to the levels. There is also a Cyber and Information Security Division, which deals with the information policy guidelines, and it was established. It is also to tackle cyber crime. And as we can see, there is somehow a palpable lack of synergy, and you don't get a feeling that India is really capable of looking at the very, very dynamic, fluctuating cyberspace architecture and environment. There is a lack of synergy, and everybody seems to be working in silos. However good and well-trained our specialists are, and it appears to be overly defensive, as highlighted by General Panwar, which is a severe limitation. And also, it is very important to note that the armed forces are not mandated at all for offensive cyber operations, which is emerging as a pivotal domain of war, which impacts all the kinetic functions of warfare. And so before I go on to the organization, since I have also got the mandate of giving out certain recommendations as far as the multi-domain operations are concerned, so that there is synergy and we have a holistic approach, I have some recommendations to make. I think it is time, with the MHA growing too large, with too much of scope and territorial, the aspects of too many things on their plate, I feel it is time to set up a Ministry of Internal Security, similar to Homeland Security, and which requires the internal security apparatus, which is increasingly under stress. Second,
Sir,
we
2
must
minutes.
set up a hybrid and disruptive technology management center. The NatGrid must be coordinated. We must enhance security consciousness, and all our organizations must be metric based. And there should be vertical and horizontal links. While I was wondering how to tell you all about a synergized sector, because somehow a compact, synergized lateral and vertical control of all the senses was not existing, and it was very difficult. It was very diffuse. And then struck me that there is an effective, synergized, integrated national organization which already exists and which is growing from strength to strength, and which happens to be the National Disaster Management Agency. And I will not highlight this, but if for those of us we have served at the apex level, we will know how fantastic in terms of teamwork, synergy, all national disasters are being managed by this disaster management structure. The synergy at the Cabinet Committee of Security or by the high-level committee, which further comes to the execution level at the National Executive Center, chaired by the Cabinet Secretary, where the entire group of ministers who are involved, the secretaries, the states with their police and all the setup, start getting things moving within 24 hours. It comes down to the states, it comes down to the district, and there is also a National Institute of Disaster Management. There is funding both by the center and the states, and it has worked beautifully. Keeping that as a backdrop, I propose that we have a National Infospace and Cyber Management Authority promulgated by the government, just like NDMA, as an act of parliament. It functions obviously with minor variations, but at the national level, we have this high-level committee. The Cabinet Committee of Security promulgates the National Infospace and Cyber Management Policy. Thereafter, whenever there is an emergency, because a cyber attack or infospace attack, even at the tactical level, it could start as a fire at the cyber level in a small district in Assam. It could spread like wildfire if it has to do more with the information space. Similarly, attack on a logistics, attack on anything. And of course, when it comes to the actual confrontation and conflict, it requires synergy. So we have this National Institute of Cyber Management, which trains the trainers. And we have already the existing setups of NCIIPC, certain, and the coordination center. We also have the other ministries who will look after their own aspects. Then we also have the armed forces and the other agencies and corporate and services. The aspects, many of these organizations will get subsumed as we analyze it further. And just like we have response.
Sorry, General Kumar, do you want to take some of it up on the Q&A also?
Okay. So, gentlemen, I am quite enthusiastic about actually recommending that we have an organization on the lines of the National Disaster Management Agency for National Infospace and Cyber Management. It is, the more I think about it, it is extremely workable, and it brings in the right amount of cohesion and synergy. Thank you.
Thank you, General PR. I'll reserve my...
Before I finish, sir, I just want to also request you that I deliberately, because of lack of time, I wanted to highlight your own recommendations as far as structure is concerned. But for the audience, I would like to say that General Panwar has also made a recommendation on the apex structure, but with a predominant and pivotal role for the armed forces, as already explained, being a fifth dimension of war, and also for a pivotal role in cyber operations. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, General PR. I'll reserve my my comments on whatever you said towards the end, because we already, I'll combine the comments towards the end. So I'll hand over the floor to Mr. Jiten Jain. Mr. Jain, with your background, while the comments that you have to make on the national architecture, etc., for defense of national cyberspace, definitely, but with a focus from the role of the intelligence agencies. If you can give us some good perspective on that, what should be their role in the defense of national cyberspace, along with your overall recommendations. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, sir, and greetings to General Murthy, General Kumar, and my beloved friend and mentor Vijay Singh, sir, one of the most famous cyber cops in India, and obviously to you, Panwar, sir. Thank you for having me here. So I think I would I second what the previous speaker said about the requirement of overhauling the cyber structure in India. Idea is to have more synergy among different sectors and more synergy among different institutions which are operating under different governments, state government, central government, and then different ministries. So I think if I, as a technical expert and with my limited experience limited to cyber intelligence and operations, in last 10 years I have formed a view that basically without going into the reports of any committee like Kargil Review Committee or recommendations given by different forces at different times, I think what where we are standing today, primarily we have a simple choice to make: whether we want to follow US model, where you have a full-fledged cyber command managed by the defense forces, and also along with it you want to have a full-fledged cyber agency like NSA, which is manned by civilians but again controlled and guided by the armed forces operators, and both working in tandem at the apex level independently. Now, the first one is completely focusing on cyber operations. Second one is also focusing on cyber intelligence as well as innovation and ecosystem management, right from funding startups to hiring of professionals to running influence operations and everything. And cyber command is limited to absolutely pure defense-related cyber operations, but both are working in absolute synergy with each other. Second choice is UK model. Because they also have a Westminster system of democracy, and I mean we have followed the same legacy. So they decided to bring everything under one umbrella to do away with this problem of lack of accountability and lack of power and lack of resources. So they bought computer emergency response team, various police agencies, and everything, whatever was there under the sun operating with cyber under one single umbrella called National Cyber Security Center, and which was completely owned and managed by GCHQ. So in a way, we bring the entire spectrum of cyber operations and the institutions under the intelligence domain with the lead intelligence agency in command directly to take care of a lot of logistical arrangements also. And with a civilian mandate to also have an interface with the civilian side. Now, third choice we have is the Chinese model, where there's an absolute control with a political party. I mean, we can easily say that, look, there is an MSS and there is a strategic support force, but then everything is managed at the political level. And there can never be a difference of opinion, like the debates we are having with different viewpoints, that could never be a case in China. Fourth is a model which we think that should work in India, should be suitable to India. I think it's great to have a good strategy in place, but do we have the capabilities and resources to implement that strategy should be the question. I mean, we have had a national cybersecurity policy for last 8 years, and we were to have, I think, 5 lakh cyber professionals, then 10 lakh. And I can't say that, yeah, we even have 5,000 today after 8 years. So somewhere down the line, I think in the challenges our country faces, the challenges like, like sir in the previous conversation referred that if we have a NDMA kind of model where different institutions can, work in complete synergy with each other, I think it's not possible in India for two fundamental reasons. A, defense is a central subject, but law and order is a state subject. So all the cyber investigations, hacking, and all those, controversies, sometimes political, non-political, are state subject. Central government might not have absolute control. Like, if tomorrow the state wants to establish its own cert, that may also be a problem, right? So law and order being a state subject might be a problem in India. Second, I think in both the two previous models, US and UK, there is some sort of oversight among the offensive capability and intelligence capability, maybe a parliamentary oversight or some sort of structured oversight, where the operator has someone to report to. Second, I think in both the countries, if you look at US and UK, despite of all the controversy, regime transitions and accusations, they have more or less managed to keep the integrity of our agencies intact, the reputation intact. I mean, you would not find a single example of any civilian organization or an NGO or a political party or a political even a small group accusing one of the agencies of having any political interference or towing the line of political masters. And government is different from politicians, by the way, government of the day. So I think that is the problem which we are facing again and again. And this is the same problem that what if we give the complete intelligence capacity to defense forces? Tomorrow, what if they want to, go in a different direction? I mean, that was one of the reasons that they didn't want to give absolute cyber offensive capability on defense side. That what if it is tomorrow used for political objectives by a different party in power? That becomes a pertinent debate in India because we are scared of Pakistan, what is happening in our countries here and there. Now, second is also a challenge that because you again, every government in power has accused the opposition party or the previous government of using agencies for political subversion and political targeting. As long as these things exist, we will be hesitant to increase capacities. Take, for example, Pegasus. One of the most amazing capacities, I think, any great country or a great democracy, worthy of its salt, wanted to secure its hostile borders, should have that capacity. I mean, I should have a capacity more than that, should have rather indigenously developed capacity. But tomorrow, if a capacity like that is offered by any sources, we will be, thinking 100 times whether to buy it or not because of a political scandal. I think this whole, internal political issues are hampering our capability generation and capability development. So I think the best model here in India is right now to bring all the agencies under one roof, be it a UK model or be it a whatever model. And let them work under the command of civilian side, absolutely in the gray zone of peacetime operations. Moment there is an emerging conflict or a possibility of an armed conflict, the entire chain of command and operational control of that organization complete, and dealing with the entire spectrum of cyber operations in India has to be transferred to armed forces. I think that would be the best model, that instead of having multiple organizations, we should have a chain, the shifting of command. I mean, and I discussed this, I think, with General Panwar in the past, that, during a specific tenure, Election Commission of India today, when the elections are announced for 3 months, they have complete superiority and power to transfer officers, requisition any source, including defense forces or paramilitary forces for security, transfer any officer, deploy as many security professionals they want anywhere in the country during the elections. Once the elections are over, everything shifts back to the central government and the state government. So I think that can work in India without inviting any political confrontation or this turf war among different ministries. Second, we have to carry out an honest assessment. I mean, 5 years ago, there is no conference where I have not spoken or anybody from the defense forces have not spoken. And Panwar sir would know very well the lack of resources which were there for us. We didn't have fund. You name any organizations, Air Force, Army, they didn't have fund to do big projects in cyber. We didn't have resources. We didn't have manpower. In last 5 years, we cannot say that we do not have funds. Enough funds have been made available to every institution which is operating today, including Defense Cyber Agency or NTRO or RNAW. Money is not a problem. Mandate is being now today enjoyed by everyone else. Rather, even by those who are not supposed to carry out cyber offensive operations, they're also carrying out cyber offensive operations. It is becoming like a mushroom or Afim farming in Afghanistan, where everybody who wishes to do cyber operations are doing it. Now, you name any government agency, including DRDO, which is supposed to be on defensive side and development side, they are also conducting offensive operations. It's like organization which is supposed to develop a missile is firing it also. NTRO, which was supposed to have overall mandate, is not alone. RAW is doing it, IB is doing it, Air Force, Army, everybody wants to have a cyber unit. We have a defense cyber agency now. So, and then several states which are indulging into it without the mandate. So, and then police agencies, ATS, border security force. I mean, for the lack of oversight or sometimes compelled by the intelligence they might need. So everybody is getting into it. So it should not become a free for all hit. We should have some sort of limited or maybe an organized way of conducting cyber operations, so that 1 or 2 agencies at max are under command of cyber offensive operations, and influence operations. Work like critical infrastructure protection has to be outsourced to a different agency. Now, third, there has to be a complete, structure of accountability. Take, for example, CERT and NCIPC. I think if anybody carries out an honest inspection of their conduct in last 7 years, everybody, if an honest assessment is carried out, will say that two organizations should not exist. NCIPC should be merged with CERT, or otherwise an organization which was supposed to take care of critical infra and all those things with 600 manpower, neither they could fill the manpower, neither they could deliver on the mandate. I mean, Brijesh be aware, he went on this port attack, which was crippled by the WannaCry ransomware. NCIPC was absent for first 2-3 days. You take the example of power grid hacks. NCIPC is absent for the first 2 days. They are later, being forced to join in the investigation, and then they say that, look, this is not a declared critical infra, so we could not do anything. I think these excuses of finding some lacunas and the loopholes in the mandates and then doing away with the accountability. But when it comes to budgets, every organization wants to have the offensive capability and that budget. So I think we have to have an honest review of acknowledging our shortcomings and doing a course correction to ensure that the organizations we create or develop, or the structures we develop, actually deliver on the test of time. Now, third, let's suppose you have an accepted strategy and an institution as recommended by the speakers in place today, and there is enough budget available. Then we are left with, again, two fundamental challenges. Where is the manpower? I think you create a new institution, same manpower from different government organizations will shift to that new institution. Some will seek transfer, some will seek postings. We are rotating same 400 to 500 people within the institutions, what is there today and what we may create tomorrow. So we have to seriously think that how do we create a structured source of manpower creation for the next 5 years with a complete due process of course correction in place and accountability in place. Third, what is the capability? And I can tell you honestly, and I've been a spoilsport in that play also, that 70% of intelligence operations across different agencies today, wherever I have worked, are outsourced. They are like civilian operators or professionals working in tandem with the government, but with a relatively lack of accountability, or sometimes people think that attribution might be an issue, so let them operate outside so that we can deny tomorrow something goes wrong. I think on this, we have to figure out that 70% of manpower or outsourcing has to stop, and 70% of their capability has to be inside the system. I mean, having 70% outsourcing could have worked for the first 5 to 7 years during the a transition phase of a nation. Like when an organization is born or when a nation is in the building stages of a capability, you could hire stuff from outside, you can hire manpower from outside, you can have contractual people, you can outsource projects. But somewhere down the line, it has to stop. Somewhere down the line, you have to have a capacity inside. Otherwise, आप हमेशा वो बैसाखी लेके चलेंगे और बैसाखी लेने वाला इंसान कभी दौड़ नहीं सकता. And the last point I want to make.
Sure, please.
Yeah, the last point I want to make. I think all the reforms which we have put in place for the development of skilled manpower are being focused on the forensic side. You have Gujarat Forensic University, you have National Institute of Forensic Science. Everybody is dealing, some teaching information security and forensics. We don't need that. Offensive is completely different from forensics, right? So we have to focus, how do we develop an offensive capability manpower? And last point where I want to make with these two things in mind, that whatever structures we recommend or develop, the manpower and capability has to be the prime focus of that reform. And third, I think in my opinion, I think we should have a North Korean model or an Iranian model. Iranians, after the Stuxnet attack 7 years ago, bought out everybody who was in prison for cyber crimes. They pardoned them. They gave them some sort of limited parole and they used them for offensive cyber manpower. So हमारे यहाँ जितने भी, और ये एक तरीका था for the creating capacity in emergency. Second is North Korean model, where guys are trained for 1 year, 1.5 years. They're hired by armed forces, civilians, and then they are sent to a training college where they are taught offensive cyber operations for 1.5 years, and then they are deployed. I think that is also a better model, that at least you create 500 trained cyber manpower every year. Instead of finding 50 talented people outside every year, we should create 500, 600 every year. So with this limited intervention, I would say that whatever reforms and whatever governance architecture we recommend should have creating manpower and capability at the core of its strategy. And third, we should have a mechanism where we review the progress of that reform or that institution every 1 year and take the corrective steps. And we learn from our mistakes. Thank you. Sir, I think you're on mute. Sir, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Jain. I think you've given a number of very interesting insights into the existing state of affairs and a number of very interesting suggestions as well. As I said, I will reserve my combined comments after the third speaker has spoken and before we go into the question answers. So I'll open the floor now to Mr. Brijesh Singh. In addition to the overall recommendations which Mr. Brijesh Singh you might have for the audience, I would welcome if you could give us an insight into how the protection of critical infrastructure, the focus on critical infrastructure, your views, because you've been involved in these affairs. So that is where we would request you to throw greater light. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Excellent views there, and I'm really enriched by the experience and thoughts of the earlier speakers. I'll start with, we were talking about offensive cyber operations, and given the mandate of MHA, I think for internal security, there is no mandate for offensive cyber operations. Now, whether it should be there or should not be there is a question which needs to be answered in the framework of the Constitution. But I suppose presently there is no mandate for any kind of offensive cyber operation within the country. Now, having said so, coming to defense of critical infrastructure, yes, there is a mandate, and I feel that though some steps have been taken, much needs to be done. Because till now we are reactive, and our response also leaves much to be desired. I have personally been part of investigation and forensics of some major cyber attacks that happened. The irony is that I would refer to one very old judgment by Justice Hidayatullah, wherein he had this theory of concentric circles. So he talked about public order, law and order, national security, public order, law and order, crime, and national security. Each of them is a decreasing circle, and these are concentric circles. So public order is the largest sphere where the even tempo of life is disturbed. The thing with cyberspace is that all these boundaries are getting destroyed. And hence, any kind of narrow view which pertains to creating some kind of a jurisdiction around this is a flawed approach. So excellent studies have been done, and if so required, I will share material on this as to how various countries have sorted this out. See, we cannot simply start thinking about the US model or the UK model, because the US constitution is different. We have evolved differently. The UK is very different. Our constitution gives specific, mandates. For example, the 7th schedule of constitution gives law and order and intelligence, law and order to the states, law and order, crime investigation to the states. But when it comes to national security, okay, there are agencies which look after national security. Similarly, there are overlapping domains, but in terms of cyberspace, you see that there may be a disinformation campaign which may be about a very local issue or about a caste issue, which may be, in deep interior Maharashtra, but it may be run from Pakistan. So today, you cannot, in that sense, create some kind of a, jurisdictional structure around it. But having said so, I believe that today, whatever problems we see are because the responsibility matrix on ground is not followed in cyberspace. So we have a multiplicity of agencies, and each is trying to carve out its jurisdiction. Each is trying to get into an operational space. And they are doing, there's a lot of duplication of work. And again, with these silos, there is lack of sharing of information, and which actually is affecting our operational capabilities. Now, if at all the country has to, the country has to develop offensive capabilities, for offensive capabilities, there has to be a clear mandate. Without mandate, I think it would be impossible to go for any kind of offensive capabilities. Look at what FBI did. So FBI was investigating a particular child porn gang. It's the Playpen case, wherein FBI used exploit for the Tor browser, and they could basically penetrate this pedophile gang. It's called the Playpen case. But when the evidence went to court, the court said it is a fruits of poisonous tree, that your acquisition of evidence was tainted with illegal means. Now, still we have a legal and constitutional framework, which is what should be sorted out. Till then, I think any kind of offensive operation within the territory of India or outside is not recommended. So, and how does one go about it? One needs to create, I believe, like taking cue from various countries, we need to have this as a specialization, which cannot be entirely, I heard some speakers talking about, defense having the mandate for offensive operations. But listen, cybersecurity, cybercrime, disinformation, and cyber war, attack on critical infrastructure is the single continuum today. And probably defense may not have the idea of how societies deal, or what exactly is intelligence, except in they may have idea about intelligence in the defense domain. But let us say the nuances of how, let's say, societies operate across border. What are, let's say, religious and ethnic dimensions which can be taken advantage of? What are the economic dimensions of espionage? Similarly, while doing this, then you will have to have to take care of transparency, take care of legality, take care of accountability. Privacy today and human rights are big things. So whenever you do this, you will have to have an agency which is specialized, which can deal with all these aspects, because it's not just one offensive thing that you go there, you strike a target and you come back. It's not going to be like that. There has to be a framework wherein you would need to develop a complete ecosystem, because it's not going to develop in vacuum. And it cannot develop, I'm sorry to say, it cannot develop in a sarkari way, because given the norms of procurement, given the norms of payment, we won't be able to attract talent, we won't be able to develop things. Because any talent worth its salt will probably cost you 100 times what you pay in the government. So we will have to come up with absolutely new kind of structures with a lot of flexibility, wherein we can develop exploits, payloads, tradecraft, a full operating infrastructure, in fact training on operational security, because this all is a continuum, and this has to be evolved in a very specialized way with a clear mandate. With definitely there should be oversight, and it has to be a hybrid agency. It cannot be the mandate of one particular wing, because we are still looking at it from the views of, let's say, land warfare. It's not that, it's totally changed. It's very asymmetric. So while we have seen that in case of terrorism, while there's a ground attack going on, there is simultaneously a cyber attack on the law enforcement systems. So plus there are influence operations, plus there is misinformation. So somewhere you have to understand that apart from being multidimensional, this has to be comprehensive. So both attack and defense has to be comprehensive. And for defense of critical infrastructure, if we cannot do adversary characterization, I think we won't be able to do anything. So today, while we say that we are a cyber power, but in reality, we are not a top-rate cyber power. And to go there is a gap. We need to do a gap analysis. We have to understand that we have to have policies, structures, frameworks, mandates, and then the right talent has to be generated in the country, because otherwise all our talent is going away to better pastures, and we are not able to retain this talent. And somewhere people say this, that there's a problem of Indian mindset. And I always say this, that we could not, for thousands of years, we could not patch up a single 0 day that is a Khyber pass. It was something which could have been patched and it would have changed history. But somewhere we lack that kind of an operational mindset towards warfare, and that also has to be cultivated. So I feel that there has to be a hybrid agency which has to be given a clear mandate under the constitutional framework, and this path has to be charted by our policymakers in consultation with everybody, right from public-private partnership to understanding of privacy and human right, to understanding of a deep understanding of adversary, its tools, techniques, and procedures. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brijesh. Again, a very interesting perspective flowing from your expertise in the internal security environment and, of course, relating it to influence operations, etc. Thank you so much. There were so many points, and now I'll try to, in the next couple of minutes, first try to summarize as to what the three speakers have said before throwing the floor open for question and answers. Now, such a vast ground was covered. I really am finding myself unable to put it together in a very concise manner. So let me just give some highlights which each of the three speakers said. Starting with General P.R. Kumar, he brought out an important point that as armed forces people, we have to look ourselves as national security professionals, because the dimensions of warfare are changing in such a manner that our whole traditional look at industrial age warfare is not good enough as an outlook. He also mentioned about the cyberspace should be considered as a sovereign domain, and that's what is under debate internationally as to how exactly do we look at cyberspace as sovereign territory. I mean, how do we go about it? Because where are the borders? And in the last episode also we talked about the effects-based approach to come to how cyber sovereignty may be violated by looking at the effects of the cyber approach. But this is an important point as to how does one look at cyberspace as sovereign space and protect it. Then, of course, one of the most primary suggestion which he made was to go in for an NDMA type of authority, which he called NICMA, National Infospace and Cyber Management Authority. Essentially, what General PR was saying was on the lines of what I think Mr. Brijesh was also trying to say, that there should be a hybrid sort of a model where all agencies are involved and can look at the entire spectrum in a coordinated manner. Now, this is one aspect which can give a thought. It is a thought process. My own views appear to be are somewhat different, which I'll just encapsulate towards the end. So these were 3 or 4 points which General PR brought out, in addition to a very comprehensive presentation on the subject. Now, coming to Mr. Jain, he gave us some very interesting insights as to how things are happening. But and he talked of these models, the UK model and the US model. The UK model, which I was also trying to indicate, that the INT and the armed forces, the two main stakeholders, they work hand in hand as one agency. So there, he was trying to indicate that the UK model, the INT agencies have predominance, whereas in the US model, the armed forces have got a predominant role, but the two are working quite close in conjunction with each other. He also, in fact, he mentioned the transfer of the intelligence function to defense. Now, really speaking, transferring the external intelligence function to defense is never on the cards. I mean, I'll speak about it a little separately towards the end. That the intelligence function, the protection function, the influence operations, and offensive cyber operations are 4 different functions. Whether we would like a common agency to handle it or not, but if we view these 4 functions as separate, then maybe a lot of things, the clarity comes in. Another point which Mr. Jain really highlighted was the politics of the entire affair, and that also was in relation to the intelligence functions. I feel that if you have powers given to a common an authority, an agency, it plays out in the form of politics in a democracy like ours. There again, I feel that the politics is associated more to do with what happens internally, domestically. But if we view it in two different scenarios, what are we doing against an adversary? I'm sure there are no politics associated with an adversary. So, well, anyway, but the important point which he brought out was the politics of the nation have to be kept in mind in developing our entire strategy. And again, the last point which I would highlight is this free for all aspect of everybody is carrying out cyber operations. Large number of agencies are carrying out cyber operations. It's a very important aspect which was in fact emerged during the last episode also. And it has to be, other speakers also indicated that definitely in terms of offensive cyber operations, there has to be a very streamlined, centralized control. It cannot be left to disparate agencies to carry out their own. Finally, coming to Mr. Brajesh, I think that aspect of the three concentric circles of public order, law and order, national security are actually really important. In fact, one point which Mr. Jiten said, I would like to highlight that. He made a mention in terms of recommendations that maybe the agencies or some agencies are looking at it in a peace type of gray zone warfare perspective, and thereafter it transfers to the armed forces during the time of national emergency or all-out conflict. I think that's an interesting point to be taken note of. Now, coming to Mr. Brajesh, again, the points which he was highlighting was that it's a very complex affair. So here, and the complexity which Mr. Brajesh alluded to was their influence operations, their intelligence operations. To start with, of course, he said that offensive operations domestically, there is no mandate, and obviously there should not be mandate because you don't carry out offensive operations against your own domestic audience. So the three aspects: intelligence, influence operations, and offensive operations, which I define as disruptive and destructive effects against an adversary state. So these are three different aspects to the entire cyber scape, so to say. And Mr. Brajesh appeared to endorse the view that, well, the whole thing should be done by a specialist agency because of things like talent management. They will not be able to do it, the fuzzy way will not work, and it's too complex, so on and so forth. So this was the broad spectrum of what the three speakers said. It is not really possible to come up with solutions in a webinar like this, but I'm sure a lot of food for thought has been generated for everybody to think about, panelists and audience included. With that, I go on to question and answers from the audience's side. Right now, I see three questions which are there, and I'm sure more will turn up as we go along. The first one is from an anonymous attendee. Okay. Anyway, but the question is like this: there will be an ethical conundrum on which model to approach, but it should be viewed from the prism of national security. Looks like every agency is working in silos. Wouldn't it be better if we had a centralized model for better utilization of resources? Okay. I think all the three speakers have really answered this question. They've all indicated that it is complex and that silos should not be there. And the obvious answer to that is yes, there should be a centralized model. The question is, how should this centralized model look, and which is best suited for a country like India? So we'll leave it at that. Now coming to the next question, which is by Mr. Oh, is it? Yes, Manjul Saxena. Manjul Saxena, sorry. So says that brilliant presentation by Mr. Brajesh Singh, probably closest to the Western approach. And the question is, there is lack of clarity on way forward despite India having extensive capability. Government of India should consider developing position papers for both defense, internal critical infrastructure, and offensive capabilities. There could be dozens of papers and could help define concentric circles for various laws which need to be created. This is more of an observation, I think. Subsequently, this could help define or clarify the remit of multiple agencies and how they will coordinate in peace and in times of war. Okay, this is a comment. There's no question there. Okay, third one appears to be a question. It is by Mr. Uday Bhanu Singh. Cybersecurity has been under discussion for several years. Having heard the panelists, seems that there is a lack of direction to address this holistically. My question is, who's responsible or accountable to train personnel for defensive offensive operations? The second question is, since this is not supported by law, is there a move to address this? I think some of the panelists might like to address this and express some additional views. So shall I request General PR, would you like to take on this?
Yeah, I'll give my point of view. Before that, I'll just take 30 seconds. After giving a lot of thought, I came up with this organization of National Infospace and Spyware Management Agency for this very reason of aspect of total amount of lack of cohesion. The point made is very valid that there are a lot of aspects which are not really related to national security, like cyber crime. But here again, like the NDMA, which handles smaller disasters, but allows the state and the district to manage it. But the beauty about the NDMA is the very fact it has the backbone and the wherewithal for everybody else to pitch in the minute it goes beyond a point or it goes beyond a disaster level. Similarly, it could start as a cyber crime, but if it catches the imagination due to social media and others into the national stage, here is now this cyber management agency, which sort of takes more focus on it and puts specialists and those responsible in terms of attribution, in terms of assuming responsibility and accountability. Second is, you can leave out the entire aspect of cybercrime, which is not related to national security, totally from the structure. Let states, which is the law and order subject, deal with it. I increasingly feel that this structure, obviously, it needs to be fleshed out, is what it is. Similarly, now coming to this question of regarding one, are we answering?
I think there is a slight audio problem with your this.
No, there is a question about the dedicated man, or is it the previous question?
I'll come to that. As far as the previous question is concerned, would Mr. would you like to add something?
No, I feel no. I would like to reiterate that having seen at the apex level how both at the lowest level to the highest level, it gets totally co-joined and it supports each other, and over a period of time, it becomes totally fine-tuned. And that is how that worked. And it is very, very similar to the various aspects of cyber, whether it is whether it is cyber terrorism, whether it is anything. It may start small, but when the entire focus is, and there is synergy between all agencies, forced synergy. I know there will again be a problem of turf wars, but that is the answer to that again is it being a central organization. Now, whether regarding that question about cyber offensive operations, I'm afraid it is a matter. And again, this will be helped by the organization of the National Infospace and Cyber Management Agency. The minute it gets the attention of the highest political hierarchy, I suggest that the PMO, like the NDMA, is a silent chairman. It is the vice chairman who is a man, either he's a political head or a man with a technological and political clout, and he has very esteemed panelists. They will ensure that it is today, and with cyber warfare being a very valid dimension of national security. Forget about conflict in terms of the wars of the armed forces. It impacts national security both externally and internally. They will be the first people, this organization, to mandate certain specific organizations to go in for offensive operations? Thank you.
Okay, since there are a number of questions, we'll move on to the next. But before that, if I may just add a remark to what General PR just said, that, and other speakers also, having a common agency for handling everything. An alternative view to look at it is that why don't we look at the various cyber functions and align them with the existing charters. So for example, if there's an int agency who's supposed to do external intelligence by way of its charter through other means, well, through cyber means, external intelligence can be allocated to that agency. There's no conflict. And similarly, if there is offensive operations against an adversary in another country, well, the armed forces are meant to do that. So why should any other agency be involved? How can MHA be involved in fighting, creating cyber effects in an adversary nation? Or why should an int agency be involved in creating cyber effects of destruction and disruption in another nation? Because that's the job of the armed forces. The complex problem is, I think, related to cyber influence operations, which Mr. Brijesh pointed out. That is where the complexity comes, because there you're targeting the society of an adversarial nation, and that's a new picture altogether. And that has to be seen in a different context altogether. So possibly a better thought needs to be given. And critical infrastructure, it's an internal security matter. So that's why I feel that MHA is the right agency to look at protection of critical infrastructure. Till such time it starts having, strategic effects, and maybe, as Mr. Jain pointed out, that, well, at certain point, in terms of national agencies, everything comes under a single control. Let's look at the next question.
Sorry, General Panwar, we got 6 minutes to wrap up. So we could go with Kaushik's question and then Binod Rijal and Ajay Fluroria.
But didn't we start a little late? I think we started on 17:10. So can we take another 10 minutes? Sure. That will give us another 10-15 minutes.
Yep, just that we have attendees locked in for that much time. But go ahead, all yours.
Okay. So since Ajay Fluroria has given 2, and I happen to know he's a very fine cyber expert himself. So let me see what he says. It is obvious that cyber manpower today has to be dedicated. What are armed forces and MHA doing about dedicated manpower to the cyber domain? And then he says that when panelists say there can be a change over of command during war, they are not ignoring the fact that cyber is a continuous function of war, where you have to prepare weapons, develop presence, and fire when required. So defense forces need to be continuously acting in this domain to support war in the other 4 domains. So I will, these combination of questions, I would address the first one to General PR. What is the armed forces doing to develop cyber capabilities? What is MHA doing? Maybe Mr. Brijesh can take it on as to what are they doing for developing cyber capabilities. And this changeover from let's say gray zone to all-out conflict, how does this changeover take place, and how can it shift from one nation to other? I think Mr. Jain, you suggested this, so maybe you could take it on subsequently. So, and if I can request, please be precise in your answers, because we want to handle a couple of questions before we close.
Sir, I will start by saying that I will be very honest and upfront in saying that when it comes to cyber as a part of multi-domain operations in active operations or active conflict, we have our basically signal agencies and signal units and subunits which are focused on it. But at the same time, there is a lack of cohesion, there is a lack of training, and in terms of defensive cyber operations, we have got an independent firewall and everybody knows how to do their job in unit and subunit level. At the macro and operational level, basically it is the core of signals which is taking it forward, or there are setups within the MO directorate and within the signals directorate which looks at it. But as I have pointed out, unfortunately, we do not have offensive cyber mandate. We may have some amount of capability, but not the mandate. And I feel that there is a need for defense forces to focus on multi-domain operations in the non-kinetic sector, which is the need of the hour. Thank you.
Mr. Brijesh on MHA.
Yeah, I'll start with a slightly unrelated subject. For a reality check, we should actually see the impact of cyber operations in the Russia-Ukraine war. And you'd find that it's very different than whatever anybody had imagined it to be. So some three very important aspects have emerged. One is non-state actors, state actors, and organized cybercrime groups. So they have impacted the cyberspace in the most significant manner. And it would be worthwhile to study how actually, a cyber war takes place. Like trains were stopped in Belarus, and petrol pumps in Moscow stopped functioning. Just find out who were responsible for these operations. Were there intelligence agencies? Were there defense professionals? Were there private individuals? What were their capabilities? What was the tool set? It would be very important to see how actually a modern cyber war takes place. Coming to MHA, MHA has been doing a lot, as Jiten also pointed about the forensic capabilities. There is also capability development on investigation of cyber crimes. Training is going on. They are also present on social media, creating awareness for people. But this is something which is whatever you do is less, because the problem is so large that it requires resources right from, let's say, for banking and fintech, right from secure coding it should start. And then with KYC, with linking of Aadhaar. So you have to develop the complete ecosystem, not just train people to act post facto for investigation of forensics. So MHA is doing a lot. It's creating capabilities. But I think much needs to be done.
Mr. Jain.
So, sir, when sir was referring to, NDMA, I think if we drill further into that model, probably, if I rightly assume, NDMA is different from NDRF. So I think that is where we could fine tune some model that NDMA can be a body somewhere which is coordinating with everyone under the space. But this whole institution, which is having a central offensive capacity like NDRF, has to be, a separate institution. So, authority what sir is pointing out could be NDRF. There is a cyber force which is in place, but NDMA has to be completely different. It can only be not be in charge of only this cyber force. It has to deal with every other agencies also. The moment we're dealing these two things and leave a limited link, we also have to understand that almost every significant power of NDMA comes in place only after the Disaster Management Act is involved. It is not throughout in continual basis. Only when the Disaster Management Act is involved, only then. So Mr. Ajay Floria is right. Cyber is a continual war you are fighting. So how do you deal with that? And that is why I said that whatever agency we create, we are not talking about creating a new institution, because even if you create a new institution, 1,000 people will not fall from sky and man that agency. These 1,000 people will come from existing setups and will be back to square one. वो capacity तो आज भी है, खाली नाम बदलने से आदमी का skill set नहीं बदलेगा. So once we have, so what we need is that people from all three services. It can nobody be this case that defense forces which are supposed to defend cannot carry out cyber offensive operations. Can be nobody's case, and whoever speaks that must be a bureaucrat. So I think defense forces have to man, experts have to man, everybody has to man that setup. But when I say that if you look at the Ukraine war, during the conflict, the process of espionage, sabotage, and subversion, the priority list of all three operations have to shift to defense forces. And defense forces should be able to decide what are the primary objectives for espionage in the times of war. Which institutions you have to sabotage, disrupt, which power grid. Civilians में क्या होगा, कुछ भी disrupt कर दो, it is like, oh, हमने कर दिया. ऐसा नहीं है. There has to be some objective behind what you're doing, and that in the times of war should always be decided by the defense force or whatever is the force, Navy or Army, which is dealing with that. Subversion, information warfare, planting of information. I mean, look at Ukraine. The complete information has shifted to online media, social media. It was left by civilian president, not by defense forces, but defense forces were completely in sync. And they were guiding what is to be done, how many Russian soldiers are being killed, right from facial recognition to sending messages to Russian families that, look, these people have been killed. Even your children are dying here. Don't think that it is only Ukrainians are dying. So what I mean is, during the times of war, the priority decision making or the priority matrix creation of this entire institution has to shift to defense forces, maybe through CDS or whatever man you put in charge. A civilian can deal with it peacetime. I mean, they will obviously be there to support that man, but the primary leadership has to shift to armed forces. Otherwise, there will always be a conflict of turf wars. No matter what we dream of, MHA has IB. and IB does offensive operations, and you can never take away from that institution. So let's live with that. So let them deal with whatever is in the peacetime. At least in the times of war, let's get the driving seat to the armed forces. That is my limited point.
Okay, let me add a couple of things there. Since General PR mentioned the Military College of Telecommunication Engineering, and we were talking of capability development. So my own view on this is that within the country today, as a structured hub of how things can move forward, it is only the Corps of Signals which has got the right structure, but it's right now not capable to the extent required of carrying out because of the lack of mandate. And a lot of progress has been, a lot of improvements have been made in creating cyber expertise for within the armed forces by Military College of Telecommunication Engineering. But it cannot be a simplistic thing. The type of training which is given here in conjunction with tapping expertise from the civil, the skill development itself is actually an episode by itself. So I'll leave it at there. Lot needs to be done to ensure that skill development. There's a whole pyramid of skills which has to be developed. It's not just the high-end expertise of that bounty hunters type of a thing which we are looking at. There's a whole pyramid of skills which has to be developed, and that's a game by itself. And I'll just make one small comment on since both speakers mentioned the Ukraine operations. I would say that the manner in which the Ukraine operations are still unfolding, in fact, is when the cyber conflict field is only 10 to 15 years old. We have to look at what is going to happen in the next 20 to 30 years. And what will happen then? I mean, will it become a proper adversarial state-to-state conflict? It will graduate to that, and to what extent it will, balance out with the kinetic force? That has to be kept in mind while making these organizations. That's the comment. We'll just look at a last question, and that is by Kaushik Shekhar. Can we have a unit like 8200 of Israel? Get the best young talent working for the state? What about reserving seats in top education institution for such talent after they have done their stint in the unit, so that their mobility is taken care of? I think I'll quickly answer this because we are running short of time. I think the way Israel goes about it, and others also, some others, it's a very good model to follow. But then capability development itself has to give in a lot of thought, and how to attract. Somebody also brought out the high payrolls which need to be created. They will need to be created for high-end jobs. So it's a complex affair. It needs to be done. And whoever is in charge of offensive cyber operations, and that is where the real expertise, high-skill expertise required is for offensive operations. Whoever we decide to give this responsibility of offensive cyber operations against an adversary state, that's the focus. That agency would be involved in creating this high skills which we need. I think we'll end the question answers there, and I'll hand over the floor to General Murthy now to do the needful to close the session. Thank you. General Murthy?
Yes, yeah, just a second. I think we've had a really marvelous discussion, and a very frank and actually a no-holds-barred discussion. And what has emerged is some very important recommendations. And I think that CASA is the right forum that we can, sort of take these recommendations, and once we finish our entire series, we would be putting up some recommendations to the Government of India. Well, all that remains for me is to thank General PR Kumar, Mr. Jiten Jain, Mr. Brajesh Singh, our panelists. Thank you very much for sharing your views, your deep insights into this subject. Thank you, General Panwar, for being the moderator. Thank you, Mahadevan, Shankar, and thank you, General Dipinder and Ms. Bannali Shinga Roy for providing all the backup. I thank all the participants for sparing your valuable time this Sunday evening to be with us. And we look forward to your presence on 31st July at 5 p.m. for episode 3 of the series, which will be on cyber influence operations, national strategy and structures, for which the registration link will be sent to all who have attended this webinar, and also those who have not been able to attend it. Thank you all once again for sparing your valuable time. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind. Thank Thank you, Badnali. You can stop the recording. Yeah.